Have you ever just stared at something you wanted to do and wondered why it feels absolutely impossible before you even try it? Well, welcome to this explainer.
So, let's dive right into this by exploring a really deeply familiar, honestly almost universal human experience. It's that sudden, overwhelming urge to just close the laptop lid, put down the pen, or quietly walk out of the room when a task feels entirely too difficult. You know the exact feeling, right? That heavy sigh before you even begin. We tell ourselves, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or we rationalize that we're just not in the right headspace or the timing isn't perfect. But what is really happening in our minds and bodies in that exact moment when we decide to walk away before we've even taken the very first step?
Think about these incredibly common everyday moments of avoidance. Picture someone who desperately wants to learn a new language. They buy the textbook, but the grammar and vocabulary looks so dense and unfamiliar that the book just sits there, glossy and unread on the desk. They avoid even opening the cover. Or think about the person who wants to get fit. They download this workout plan that is so grueling, so intense for a beginner, that their muscles scream on day one, and they just give up completely after, 3 days? Imagine the aspiring writer who sits down to create a beautiful, moving story, but their imagined final results is so far above their current ability that they feel this crushing sense of shame before they've even written a single word on the blank page. Or picture a child staring blankly at a complex math problem, shoulders completely slumped. You see, they aren't avoiding it because they're lazy, they're avoiding it because the problem feels so much larger than their current confidence. These moments, they paint a pretty moody, reflective atmosphere, don't they? But they also show us that avoidance is not some rare defect or a flaw in our character. It's a universal, deeply human experience.
Part 1. The hidden mismatch. Why it's not about weakness.
Let's look at the underlying architecture of this avoidance. We really need to completely transition away from the idea that quitting is a moral failing or a sign of an unmotivated character. It's actually a structural error in how we're approaching our goals. The friction we feel, that intense physical desire to just stop, is actually a mathematical mismatch. Picture a seesaw. On one end, we have the perceived challenge, this towering mountain representing just how enormous and complex the task appears to be in our mind. And on the other end, resting much lighter, are the tools of our perceived skill, how capable, practiced, and equipped we currently feel to handle it. When these two elements are wildly out of balance, the whole system simply breaks down.
And this leads us to a core realization. A task becomes frightening when the perceived challenge is much higher than the perceived skill. Now, I want you to notice that word, frightening. This massive gap between what's required and what we believe we can do creates intense anxiety. The brain literally interprets this gap as a threat to our safety. And, well, when faced with a threat we can't conquer, our biological and psychological instinct is naturally to escape, to avoid, and ultimately, to just quit.
Part 2. Mapping the 3 zones, where we give up. To really grasp this, we need to map out exactly where our drive breaks down. Imagine a chart of our internal state. On the vertical axis, climbing upward, we have challenges. Stretching out along the horizontal axis, we have our skills. There are 3 distinct zones here. If you fall into the lower right, where your skills are high but the challenge is low, you slip into boredom. The task is entirely too easy, so you just disengage. Now, if you look at the upper left, where the challenge is incredibly high but your skills are low, this is the zone of anxiety. This is exactly where the language book stays closed and the math problem is avoided. But that diagonal channel right in the middle, that's the optimal zone. That is where challenges and skills are perfectly, beautifully balanced, and where real human growth is actually possible.
When we sit in that upper left zone, the anxiety zone, we experience something called psychic entropy. It's a state of deep inner disorder. Basically, information is flooding in that conflicts with our goals, and we experience it as fear, as rage, or as the desperate urge to flee the room. Sitting in this anxiety zone completely fragments our attention. It creates total inner chaos. It leaves us entirely unable to focus, which is precisely why staring at a difficult task makes us want to endlessly scroll on our phones instead. We aren't being lazy, we are literally fleeing the entropy.
Part 3. Misreading our anxiety. The trap of comparison. Let's move to a crucial realization about how we incorrectly interpret this feeling of inner chaos when we face hard things. We constantly, and I mean constantly, fall into the trap of comparing our fragile, clumsy beginnings to an expert's polished, finished masterpiece. A beginner picking up a paintbrush looks at a museum-quality painting and feels an immediate crushing sense of inadequacy. We look at the beautiful final results of others and feel deeply ashamed of our own starting point before we even begin. This false comparison instantly shoots the perceived challenge through the roof, paralyzing our progress.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is this powerful cognitive reframe.
We misread anxiety as proof of our inability when it only means the task is badly sized. Just let that sink in for a second. Badly sized. The fear you feel when looking at a hard project is not proof that you are weak, lazy, or incapable. It simply means the current challenge is disproportionate to your current skill. It's an engineering problem, you guys, not a character flaw.
Part 4. Sizing the challenge. Shrinking the first step. If the issue is simply an engineering problem of mismatched sizes, then the answer isn't shaming ourselves into pushing harder. The answer is deliberately calibrating the challenge. We can fix this mismatch using a simple mechanical toolkit. Okay, step 1, shrink the first step. If the challenge is too big, you must deliberately make it smaller. Don't set out to write an entire novel today, just write one single paragraph. Step 2, lower the entry point. Make it incredibly easy to just start the activity. Put your gym shoes right by the door so the barrier to entry is practically zero. And step 3, create clear, fast feedback. You need to know immediately if what you're doing is actually working, so your brain receives the biological signal that it is safe to keep investing energy.
This process brilliantly illustrates how someone finally makes meaningful progress. By breaking the towering task into smaller, bite-sized steps, monitoring immediate feedback, and constantly adjusting expectations to match their actual, current abilities, they pull themselves out of the anxiety zone. It's exactly like a hiker adjusting their footing step by step to the shifting, uneven terrain of a steep mountain trail. The hiker doesn't look up at the peak and try to leap to the summit in one impossible bound. That would be absurd. Instead, they lower their gaze and they only focus on the mechanics of the very next step right in front of them.
To do this, we have to undergo a radical shift in our mindset. We must shift from, I must master this completely right now, to, I only need the next challenge that is slightly above my current level. Abandoning the heavy pressure of immediate mastery is what allows us to step back into that central diagonal channel, the only zone where true growth is actually possible.
Part 5. The edge of focus. Finding the right balance.
Now, you might be wondering, if difficulty causes avoidance, shouldn't we just make everything completely easy? Well, no. Despite the discomfort, we fundamentally require challenges in order to grow. Growth requires challenge, but not overwhelming challenge. If we reduce the challenge too much, we just fall back into the bottom right of our chart, the boredom zone. We become apathetic. The most rewarding experiences in our lives happen when our abilities are stretched just slightly beyond their current limits, not broken by them, but stretched.
Let's look at this beautiful observation. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult. Notice the word voluntary. When we properly size a challenge, stepping into it becomes a voluntary, purposeful act. Facing these appropriately sized difficulties actually brings deep order to our minds. It clears away the psychic entropy and slowly, steadily builds our sense of mastery.
Part 6. The goal. Transforming fear.
As we synthesize what this new relationship with difficulty should actually look like in our daily lives, it's vital to emphasize that overcoming difficulty is not about becoming fearless. The goal is not to eradicate fear or to turn yourself into some unfeeling, hyper-productive machine that never experiences self-doubt. Fear and anxiety are natural biological indicators. They're really just dashboard lights telling you that the challenge is currently outpacing your skill.
The true art of learning, of creating, of doing hard things is simply learning how to resize the task. It's about taking that overwhelming mountain and shrinking it down to a single, manageable step. So I leave you with this thought. When you inevitably face a task that makes you want to walk away, how will you place yourself at the exact edge where fear transforms into focus?